Okay, so today we're going to be talking about the basic structure of the human body. Um, we need to understand when we think about the human body that really we're very much like a machine, highly organized and with multiple systems within our body. When we think about our body and disease, what happens with disease is if something occurs in the human body where there's a malfunction, that really is a disease then. So if you think about the normal function of the cells in the lungs, if something happens to some of those cells and there's a mutation that ends up being cancerous, that really is a malfunction of those cells. When we talk about anatomy of the body, this is the study of the form and the structure. So what does it look like? How is it shaped? For example, the heart has four chambers. It's a large muscle. That's the form and the structure. So the study of that structure is anatomy. Whereas the study of how the heart functions, what is actually occurring within that heart and the system of the cardiovascular system, that's a physiology. Now, when we think about disease and when disease occurs in the body, we talk about the term pathophysiology, and that's really the study of how disease is affecting the body and how it occurs within the body. We are made of the coolest stuff ever. So, in all of our intelligence, all the things that we know, all the things that we can do scientifically, we can clone a sheep, we can um, create devices so tiny, these nanobots, that they can go almost to the cellular level. We can do this incredible stuff, yet something as simple as protoplasm we can't make. And it's made of the simplest things, carbon, oxygen, and hydrogen. But we cannot, or scientists cannot combine these elements in the same way that protoplasm is to create life. Our cells, these are the smallest unit of living organisms. So they're the basic unit, and they're made of protoplasm. They're microscopic, which means we can't see them with the naked eye. Their job is to carry on all the different functions in the body, but each cell carries on all those individual functions of life. So they reproduce, they have respiration, they create energy through metabolism, so they do all those basic functions. Our bodies have trillions of cells, and our cells are constantly being renewed. So cells die and then we create new ones. They vary in all different sizes and shapes according to the different function that they have, and they perform multiple different functions within the body. The basic parts of the cells, I'm going to tell you, you need to know this for your test. You're going to need to know all these parts of the cells. So the cell membrane, this is the outer protective covering of the cell. It is semi-permeable. That's an important concept. What does semi-permeable mean? It means that some things can go through it. So think of our cell membranes similar to like a coffee filter. If you put the coffee grounds in the filter, those grounds can't go through. However, the water that we pour over it can, so that's semi-permeable. Cytoplasm is also part of the cell, and this is the fluid kind of in the cell. It has water and proteins, carbohydrates, lipids, etc. And this is where all those chemical reactions in the cell occur. So cytoplasm is very important for the function of the cells. Now, in our cells, we also have what we call organelles. Organelles are these little tiny structures that help the cell to function. And oftentimes we can equate the organelles in the cell to one of our major organs in the body. And all the different organelles are located in the cytoplasm. So some of the organelles that there are, first of all, there's the nucleus, and we consider the nucleus the brain of the cell. It controls many of the cell activities. It's important for cell replication. Inside of the nucleus is something called the nucleolus, and this is critical for the cell division. So it's very important in regards to how that cell is going to replicate. And also ribosomes are manufactured there. We also have chromatin, and the chromatin is is made up of DNA and protein, and this is what's going to condense to make our chromosomes. So again, very important for replication. So different human cells, they have 23 pairs of chromosomes, and we know that if there's a problem within those 23 pairs of chromosomes, that can lead to malformation. It could lead to the organism not even being able to replicate. Each chromosome has about 100,000 genes, and then those genes are made up of DNA, and that is our genetic coding. So that's all happening within the nucleus. The centrosomes, these are located in the cytoplasm, and they help the cell create an even division of the chromosomes for, again, for replication or division. The mitochondria, we think of the mitochondria as the powerhouse of the cell. It's going to work with metabolism, breaking down carbohydrates and proteins and fats for energy. So that's why we consider it the powerhouse. And the Golgi apparatus, this is a stack of membrane layers in the cytoplasm. And what this does is it produces and packages and stores secretions. So some cells are going to be real rich in Golgi apparatus, and some not as, aren't going to have quite as much. But if you think about our mucous membranes, the cells of our mucous membranes, that's a lot of what they do, right? They're secreting. So those are going to have very active Golgi apparatus. Endoplasmic reticulum, that is also, again, located in the cytoplasm, and this helps the transport of materials in and out of the nucleus. So as the nucleus is creating ribosomes, that's helping that get in and out. And then they also help with the synthesis and storage of protein. And again, it has those ribosomes. Lysosomes, these are kind of like the trash men in the cell. They're going to get rid of old bacteria and byproducts in the cell, and has the digestive enzymes. The pinocytic vesicles, these are pocket-like folds in the cell membrane, and they allow these big molecules to enter the cell. So if there's something that needs to get into the cell that is too big, cannot get through that semi-permeable membrane because it's too big, those vesicles, they can encapsulate it, they fold around it, and then bring it into the cell that way. So this is just a picture of the cell, and in your worksheet you're going to need to draw a picture of the cell, and then also you're going to need to note where all these different, or what all these different organelles are and what they look like. So again, this is just a picture of the cell with the various different organelles within it. So mitosis and meiosis are different ways that the cells reproduce. And so mitosis, this is asexual reproduction, which what happens, and this is what most cells do, by the way, what they do is they actually kind of double everything in the cells and then split apart. So that's mitosis. Cells reproduce at all kinds of various rates. Some are very quick, some take a long time. So it just varies based on the type of body cell. Meiosis, this is the type of reproduction that happens for the sex cells or gametes. So for example, the ova, our eggs, and then sperm. So it is actually going to divide the cells in half. So there's only half of the genetic material, so that when those two come together and combine, you get that whole set of chromosomes. So if you look at an ova and a sperm, they're only going to have half of the chromosomes, 23, versus the full set of 46. So you can see the process of mitosis. I know this isn't a great picture, but you can kind of see how things kind of double up, and then they go to the different sides of the cell, and then they pull apart, and then you end up eventually with two cells. Now, when we think about cells, when cells that are of the same type come together, we get something called a tissue. So, for example, when we get striated muscle cells together, they're going to form muscle tissue. So our different tissues, we have four basic groups of tissues. They're mostly water, 60 to 99%, depending upon what kind of tissue we're talking about. So we have epithelial, connective, nerve tissue, and muscle tissue. So the majority, our tissues, they're all going to fall in those categories. When we think about nerve tissue, this is going to control and communicate. So that's like our nerves or neurons. The epithelium, this is going to secrete and protect, so things like our skin, our mucous membranes, etc. Muscle is move and protect, but also this is going to include like our skeletal muscle. It's also going to include our cardiac muscle. And then supporting and connecting, that's our connective tissue. That's the stuff that kind of holds us together. So again, epithelial tissue, this provides our protection. It's our mucous membranes. They cover our vital organs, for example, lungs and heart. They're also going to line the inside of our vessels, our cavities, the abdominal cavity, chest cavity, etc. Our connective tissue, these are other tissues that kind of support the epithelial tissues. This is forms our framework, and we include in our connective tissue bones, cartilage, ligaments, tendons, and fatty tissue. We also consider blood a form of connective tissue because it really does kind of connect the whole body together. Muscle tissue, we have three basic types. We have skeletal muscles, smooth muscle, and cardiac muscle. Our skeletal muscle, this is attaching to our bones. This helps us with our movement, and this is voluntary. We can control our skeletal muscle. Whereas our smooth muscle, this is what's going to line the walls of our blood vessels, our stomach, intestines. So remember when we talked about peristalsis, that rhythmic motion? That is not voluntary. That smooth muscle, we don't have control of that. Also, a muscle that we don't have control of would be our cardiac muscle. And cardiac muscle is muscle tissue that's separate and looks different than the skeletal muscle and the smooth muscle. And the cardiac muscle is what forms the muscle of our heart. And again, that is involuntary. Nervous tissue, this is the tissue that helps us communicate. So this is going to conduct information. It is sending signals from the brain to the spinal cord and out to our nerves. It allows us to communicate not only within ourselves, but also with our external environment. So organs and systems. When we get two or more tissues that come together for a specific purpose, that's going to form an organ. So for example, in our stomach, we have several different types of tissue that come together to form that one organ that's going to have function. Now, when I add some other organs together with that stomach, for example, the liver and the small intestine and then the large intestine, that becomes then a system. So we've gone from just the stomach to the entire digestive system. So you can see the various organization of a human body, and so going from looking at just individual cells and organelles and tissues and organs, etc. So you can see it right up the chain there. So again, remember that protoplasm, this is a basic substance of life. This is something that cannot be created, at least not yet. And really, if you think about Frankenstein, the story of Frankenstein, where the Dr. Frankenstein reinnervates or gives life to his monster, that is what he would have to do, is he'd have to make some way to make protoplasm. The protoplasm is going to form the structural units called cells. Cells combine to make tissues. Tissues combine to make organs. And then organs come together, various organs, to form systems. And then those systems work together and create the human body. So body planes and directions and cavities, these are super important for us as healthcare providers to understand and to know. The reason is because we need to communicate with our peers about various different things. For example, if a patient is complaining of abdominal pain, by using directional terms or body cavities, we can pinpoint that much better. So if a patient tells me that they have pain and they're holding their upper right belly, that I'm going to report to my peer that the patient's experiencing pain in the upper right quadrant. That way, it helps us kind of understand, number one, where something is, and also knowing what the underlying organs are can help us to begin to figure out what's going on with that patient. So most of our directional terms, they're created by planes. And so if you think about anatomical man is standing forward, arms to the side, palms facing forward. So when we take that person and we divide them in half, that's the transverse plane, that's putting them into a top and a bottom. So above the transverse plane is superior, below it is going to be inferior. The mid-sagittal or median plane divides the body into right and left halves. So if we say that something is medial, we're going more towards midline. And if I say that it is, if for example a wound is on the medial aspect of the right thigh, that's going to tell me to look on the right thigh towards midline. When we use the term frontal or coronal, this is where we're dividing a body into the front and the back. So we have the anterior, which is the front. So we're thinking about like where your face would be, that's anterior. And then if we think of the back, we're thinking about posterior. So again, that would be the back of the body. So we're going in the front and the back. So if you look at these planes here, you can see the mid-sagittal plane is dividing that person into right and left side. The transverse plane is dividing the person into an upper and lower half, whereas the frontal plane is forward and backward. So the terms associated with those is medial means midline, lateral means away from midline. Cranial is going to be towards the head, superior is going to be above that transverse plane, inferior is going to be below. Caudal means towards the tail, or the back, the back side of the body. Posterior or dorsal means the back, and then anterior or ventral means the front. Now, again, the cavities also really help us to identify, what might be happening with a patient, or to identify where pain or something else is. So the cavities are the spaces in the body, and these cavities contain our vital organs. So the dorsal or posterior cavity, that's going to have the spinal cord, and it's going to have our cranial cavities. The anterior cavities are going to be the thoracic cavity, which is going to be the chest. It's going to have the heart and lungs. Abdominal cavity is going to have liver, spleen, stomach, and intestines. The pelvic cavity then is also going to have some of that intestine, and then also it's going to have your bladder and then our reproductive organs. Anterior is going to be the skull or the face, and that's going to have the cavities, of the skull. So the buccal cavity, the nasal and orbital cavities, so that's where your eyes or your nose is going to be, in your mouth. So again, you can see these different cavities And you are going to need to know where each of these cavities are and the main structures within those cavities. The abdominal regions, we have the abdomen separated into regions and quadrants because it's just so big, and there's a lot of stuff happening there. There's a lot of underlying structure in there. So we do the right upper quadrant and the left upper quadrant, the right lower quadrant, and then the left lower quadrant. So that's the 4 basic sections. Whereas the regions, we divide it then into the 6 regions. So we have the epigastric, umbilical, and hypogastric. And then on each side, we have a hypochondriac, lumbar, and iliac or inguinal. So that's going to be to the right or the left. So you actually have the 6 and then 3 on each side, so 9. So here's your quadrants: right upper quadrant, right lower, left upper, and left lower, and we just divide it into those 4 sections. We use this all the time when we're listening to bowel sounds after surgery. We want to make sure that bowel sounds are present and active in all 4 quadrants. And then when we look at these regions, again, here you've got the epigastric, umbilical, and hypogastric regions. And then on each right and left side, you've got a hypochondriac, lumbar, and iliac.